On the morning of May 28, 1754, a 22-year-old Virginia militia officer made a decision in the woods of western Pennsylvania that started a war on 5 continents. His name was George Washington. He had no idea what he had just done. But that 15-minute skirmish in a wooded hollow, a decision made by a young man who had never commanded a real battle, would eventually drag Britain, France, Austria, Prussia, Russia, Sweden, and half the world into the most destructive conflict the century had yet seen. This is the story of that decade, and the 22-year-old at the center of it is only getting started. 10-minute decade. This is the 1750s. The Ohio Valley in 1750 is the most contested piece of real estate in North America. Whoever controls it controls the connection between French Canada in the north and French Louisiana in the south. If France holds that corridor, the British colonies are permanently pinned between the Appalachians and the Atlantic. 13 separate provinces with no room to grow and no future as anything more than a coastal strip. If Britain takes it, the entire French strategy for North America collapses. The Native American nations of the Ohio Valley, the Delaware, the Shawnee, the Mingo, understand perfectly well that they are the prize in this contest. They are playing both European powers against each other, with the same diplomatic sophistication that the Iroquois Confederacy has been deploying for generations. Some align with France, some with Britain. Most are trying to preserve their own autonomy against both. The Virginia-Ohio Company, in which George Washington's family has a financial interest, has been granted land in the Ohio Valley by the Virginia colonial government and wants to settle it. The French have been building a chain of forts to block exactly this expansion. Fort Duquesne, at the confluence of the Allegheny and Monongahela rivers, the site of present-day Pittsburgh, is the southernmost and most strategically important of these forts. Washington has been sent by the Virginia governor to assert British claims and warn the French to leave. They have declined. And so, on May 28, 1754, in a wooded hollow that history calls Jumonville Glen, everything changes. Washington's force attacks a French reconnaissance party at dawn. The engagement lasts 15 minutes. 10 Frenchmen are killed, including their commander, the ensign Joseph Coulon de Jumonville. 21 French soldiers are taken prisoner. The French claim Jumonville was a diplomatic envoy, not a military target. They call it an assassination. The argument over who fired first and why will echo across 2 continents. Washington retreats to a hastily constructed position he calls Fort Necessity, a small circular palisade in a meadow that any competent military engineer could have told him is indefensible. The French attack on July 3rd with a force that significantly outnumbers his. After a day of fighting in the rain, Washington surrenders. Among the terms he signs, without fully understanding the French text, is a clause describing the killing of Jumonville as an assassination. He is 22 years old. He has started a world war, surrendered his first command, and inadvertently confessed in writing to murdering a French diplomat. His military career appears to be over. It is not over, but the next chapter of his education will be provided by one of the most catastrophic British military defeats of the century. General Edward Braddock arrives in Virginia in early 1755 with 2 regiments of British regulars and a mission to take Fort Duquesne. He is a professional soldier of considerable experience and considerable contempt for colonial militia, for American wilderness conditions, and for any advice that contradicts his existing assumptions. Washington joins Braddock's expedition as a volunteer aide, determined to watch a professional British general conduct a major campaign because that education is unavailable anywhere else in Virginia. On July 9, 1755, Braddock's column, nearly 1,400 British regulars and colonial troops stretched out along a forest road, is ambushed by a French and Native American force near the Monongahela River, 7 miles from Fort Duquesne. The British regulars, trained to fight in open European formations, are caught in dense forest by an enemy they cannot see and cannot form against. The French and their Native American allies fire from cover with devastating effectiveness. Braddock rides back and forth, trying to rally his men, and is shot from his horse. He dies 4 days later. Of the 1,400 men in the column, Nearly 900 are killed or wounded. It is the worst defeat suffered by British forces in North America in the entire colonial period. Washington performs with conspicuous courage. 2 horses are shot under him. He finds 4 bullet holes in his coat afterward. He survives when far more experienced men do not, and later writes that he had been protected by the all-powerful dispensations of Providence. The extraordinary circumstances of his survival will follow him for the rest of his life. The lesson he draws from the Braddock Disaster is one he will never forget. That European military doctrine applied mechanically in American wilderness conditions produces catastrophe, and that fighting in North America requires adaptability, knowledge of terrain, and respect for an enemy who does not fight by European rules. He files this lesson away. He will need it. This local disaster in Pennsylvania is actually a small piece of something much larger that is now engulfing the world. The 7 Years' War, which Winston Churchill would later call the First True World War, has broken out simultaneously in Europe, North America, India, the Caribbean, and at sea. Britain and Prussia are fighting France, Austria, Russia, and Spain across 5 continents. Fort Duquesne and the Ohio Valley are one front in a conflict whose outcome will redraw the map of the entire world. While Braddock's survivors are still burying their dead, something is happening in Philadelphia that will prove far more consequential to America's future than any battle. In June 1752, the precise date is uncertain, Benjamin Franklin conducts the most famous scientific experiment in American history. He flies a kite in a thunderstorm. The experiment is designed to test his hypothesis that lightning is electrical, that the terrifying bolts that kill people and burn buildings are not the wrath of God, but a natural phenomenon subject to the same laws as the sparks he has been generating in his laboratory for years. He attaches a metal key to the kite string, connects it to a Leyden jar, and flies the kite into a storm cloud. The key becomes electrified. Lightning is electricity. The experiment makes Franklin famous across the Enlightenment world. His letters describing his electrical work had already been read to the Royal Society in London, where they had initially been met with polite skepticism, until the experiments were replicated and the skepticism collapsed. French scientists conduct their own verification experiments in the gardens of Versailles, demonstrating the results to an astonished court. The Académie des Sciences elects Franklin a corresponding member. Immanuel Kant calls him the new Prometheus, the man who stole fire from the heavens. The practical application of his discovery is immediate and world-changing. The lightning rod, a simple metal spike connected by a wire to the ground, disperses the electrical charge of a lightning strike harmlessly into the earth, rather than letting it ignite the building it strikes. Franklin promotes it tirelessly. Within a decade, lightning rods appear on buildings across the colonies, on ships, on churches, on powder magazines where an unprotected lightning strike would be catastrophic. Lives are saved. Buildings survive storms that would previously have destroyed them. It is one of the most direct and immediate translations of scientific discovery into practical benefit in the history of technology. Franklin's scientific fame gives him something that will prove enormously useful in the years ahead. A European reputation that transcends his identity as a colonial printer from Philadelphia. When he eventually goes to London and Paris as a political representative of the American colonies, he goes as a man whom educated Europeans already know, admire, and want to meet. The kite and the key are part of what makes the American Revolution possible. Also, in 1754, Franklin drafts the Albany Plan of Union, the first serious proposal for colonial union in American history, which proposes a unified colonial government with a president general appointed by the Crown and a Grand Council elected by the colonial assemblies. Both the colonial assemblies and the British government reject it. The colonies refuse it because it gives too much power to a central authority. London refuses it because it gives too much power to the colonies. But the debates it generates begin to accustom colonial thinkers to the idea that the 13 separate colonies might function as a single political entity. That idea, rejected in 1754, will be taken up again in 1776 with very different results. The war itself goes badly for Britain in the mid-1750s. Fort Duquesne holds. The Iroquois Confederacy watches British military incompetence and hedges its bets. French allied Native American raids devastate the Virginia and Pennsylvania frontier. Washington commands Virginia's frontier defenses with insufficient men, writing increasingly frustrated letters to a governor who could not give him what he required and somehow holding a line that should not have held. Then, in 1758, William Pitt the Elder takes effective control of British war policy, and everything changes. Pitt pours resources into North America, commits regular troops in unprecedented numbers, and selects commanders on merit. The results are immediate. Fort Duquesne falls in November 1758, abandoned and blown up by the French as a British force approaches. Washington is present when the British column reaches the ruins of the fort. He has been trying to reach this place for 4 years. The decade closes with British forces advancing on Quebec, French power in North America collapsing with a speed that astonishes even its enemies, and a young Virginia colonel named George Washington retiring from active military service to marry a wealthy widow named Martha Custis and manage his Mount Vernon estate. He is 27 years old. He has been at war, in one form or another, for 5 years. He has started a world war in a Pennsylvania woodland, surrendered his first command in the reign at Fort Necessity, watched General Braddock lead nearly 1,400 men into a catastrophic ambush and ridden through the chaos with bullet holes in his coat and 2 horses shot under him. He has commanded Virginia's frontier defenses for 3 years with a fraction of the men he needed, writing frustrated letters to a governor who could not give him what he required, and somehow holding a line that should not have held. And he has watched Fort Duquesne, the fort that started everything, fall at last to the empire he served. What he takes home to Mount Vernon is not just the memory of battles. It is an education that no European military academy could have provided. He knows what happens when professional European soldiers apply their doctrine mechanically in American wilderness. He knows the difference between a general who commands from the rear and a leader who rides through the fire. He knows what men will endure when they trust the person leading them, and what they will not endure when they do not. He knows the geography of a continent that most of his contemporaries have never seen. Mount Vernon is where Washington wants to be. He intends to stay there. He has farming to do, an estate to manage, a new marriage, a life to build. The war is someone else's problem now. He is wrong about that. But the man who returns to Mount Vernon in 1759 is not the same man who rode into the Pennsylvania woods in 1754. The 1750s have made George Washington into something. The 1770s will reveal what. That brings us to the end of U.S. 1750 to 1759. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave a comment below. It helps the channel enormously. The next episode covers the USA from 1760 to 1769. The decade when Britain wins the greatest military victory in its history and immediately begins losing everything it just won. The French threat that kept the colonies loyal disappears. And Britain, celebrating its triumph, makes a series of decisions so perfectly calculated to produce rebellion that you almost wonder if they were doing it on purpose. We will see you there.